Donald Trump has fired the opening salvos in his long-promised trade war. Canada and Mexico are firing back. The president says Europe could be next. The UK is hoping to stay out of it altogether. We'll see. Here, Rachel Reeves said she's all about growth, even if it means putting environmental concerns to one side. But with millions in population growth on the way and skills shortages, what about immigration? Keir Starmer is meeting Germany's Chancellor today and is off to Brussels tomorrow. Could the push for growth lead to a much closer relationship with the EU? For the government, we'll be joined by Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. And for the Conservatives, the Shadow Business Secretary, Andrew Griffith. We'll also speak to the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey. And we'll get the view from Europe from the chair of the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, David McAllister. Plus, with us throughout the show, crossbench peer and FT columnist Camilla Cavendish, former BBC Director General and FA Chair Greg Dyke, and Brexiteer former Northern Ireland Minister Steve Baker. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. If you listen to politicians, AI is going to be the answer to pretty much all our economic problems. The stock markets agree. Investors are betting trillions on the promise of the technology. Perhaps they're right, but only up to a point. AI won't change a nappy, do your brain surgery, or cheer up your granny. And it can't lay the concrete for your new home. For all that, we need human workers from around the world. Over 1 million last year alone. And according to the Office for National Statistics, this week we can expect another 5 million by 2032. But they too need homes. Their children need schools. And their families need care. That all costs. And let's not beat around the bush. For some of us, immigration brings variety, creativity, excitement. For others, it means danger and discontent. As the Swiss writer Max Frisch famously said in 1965, we asked for workers, but we got people instead. Rachel Reeves wants more growth. According to the polls, the voters want fewer migrants. Something or somebody's going to have to give. Let's start this morning with the government. A little earlier, I spoke to the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. Home Secretary, you're promising new legislation to outlaw AI-generated images of child abuse. How will you police that?
Morning, Trevor. Well, what we need to do is to strengthen the law, first of all, and then make sure that we've got the stronger regulatory powers in place as well. This is a real disturbing phenomenon that we've got, where we've known for some time the online child sexual abuse material is growing, but also the grooming of children, teenagers online. And what's now happening is that AI is putting this on steroids, and it is making it easier for perpetrators, for abusers to groom children. And it's also meaning that they are manipulating images of children and then using them to draw and to blackmail young people into further abuse. It's just the most vile of crimes. So what we need to do is to strengthen the law, and that includes banning some of the sort of AI models being used for child abuse, but also banning some of the paedophile manuals, effectively these AI manuals that are being used. The National Crime Agency does immensely important work, but they are saying these further powers are needed, and they will then be able to use them to get prosecutions to keep more children safe.
It's hard to think of a crime that feels more evil.
Yeah.
But let's be clear. Is this legislation going to mean that if someone uses AI to make an image but doesn't share it, that they'll have committed a criminal offence?
So we know that the creating of these AI images is in itself, it is abusive of children. So very often they're using images of real children and then abusing them, manipulating them and making them sexualised. These are being circulated then in these huge forums. And what the National Crime Agency will say is this is drawing more perpetrators into more extreme and more sadistic abuse. And frankly, this is just dangerous.
But just as a matter of principle, people may do things that are offensive and disgusting and repellent. But does that amount to criminal behaviour?
I think when it comes to children, then yes, it does, because it's children that we need to protect. And what the evidence shows is that the escalation of this material also is more likely to lead to offline abuse, and it is being used directly to traumatise children online. The grooming, the getting them to share images, getting them to be drawn into streaming abuse. So this is real. I'm really worried that people think, oh, well, it's AI, we shouldn't take it seriously. Actually, the evidence is that what it's doing is it's actually escalating and accelerating the abuse, and that's why the laws that we're bringing in, this is world leading. Other countries are not yet doing this, but I hope everyone else will follow.
All right, let's turn to the issue of the week, which has been economics, growth and trade. This morning, President Trump has imposed tariffs on trade with China, Mexico and Canada. We could be next. Prime Minister's in Brussels tomorrow. Is it time for us to draw closer to the EU to protect our economy?
Well, we want stronger trading relationships all over the world. It's why we've been working on resetting the relationship with our European neighbours so that we can improve the trade, so that we can improve law enforcement cooperation. We're doing the same, for example, on tackling the dangerous small boat crossings. We need that stronger cooperation with France, with Germany. So, of course, we need to strengthen that cooperation and also look for stronger trading relationships with the US and other countries as well. That's part of growth.
Does stronger cooperation with the EU mean, for example, a new customs agreement?
Well, we've always said that some of the red lines as part of that reset is no return to the customs union, to the single market or to free movement, and that remains the case.
So of course, absolutely no movement on any of that?
Well, of course, what you want to do is to have to get rid of some of the bureaucracy around some of the customs arrangements as goods cross borders, but that's about actually us reducing bureaucracy because, frankly, the deal that the previous Conservative government got actually was not a good one in terms of making sure we can reduce the bureaucracy and help businesses trade better.
Well, let's test that out. How are you getting on with negotiating a youth mobility scheme with the EU?
Well, we've been clear that we need net migration to come down. Under the Conservatives, net migration quadrupled in the space of 4 years. That was the wrong thing for the UK. So we're clear that net migration needs to come down. So that's why this is not an approach that we are looking for.
So no youth mobility scheme?
That's not the right starting point for us at all, because what we need to do is to bring net migration down, and we're clear that has to mean, for example, recognising that it's work migration that massively increased at the same time as training in the UK was plummeting. That's really damaging. OK,
and I'm not entirely sure I got a clear answer, forgive me, I missed it, on a customs arrangement.
Well, no to the customs union. That's what we said.
Well, not a union, but maybe something that would make things easier. For example, joining what is called the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention that maybe would take away some of those frictions. I mean,
I think the Chancellor said, look, we'll look at reducing ways to reduce frictions. That's absolutely the right thing to do, but we're not returning to a customs union. But those are all the sorts of things that, if you look at, what are the different ways in which you can reduce bureaucracy for business, that is the right thing to do. But you do it in a framework which says we are outside the EU, we're not returning to the EU, that's been clear. We need to move on and build those better, stronger trading relationships to support businesses.
All right, well, let me just ask you that finally on this point then, what might seem a rather nerdy point, but you are putting through a piece of legislation which is essentially which is called a Product Regulation and Metrology Bill. I've got to read it here. And it seems like a technical piece of legislation, but it says that ministers will have the power to make provision which corresponds or is similar to a provision of relevant EU law for the purpose of reducing or mitigating the environmental impact of products. Now, what I read that to mean is that the business secretary or the relevant minister can simply wave his or her hand and make an arrangement that will make some products go to and from the EU much more easily without recourse to Parliament, as long as they can say it makes environmental sense. Now, that's quite a good way of getting round these frictions, isn't it?
Well, do you know what, Trevor? I have to say, no disrespect, but coming on the programme with Home Secretary in the context of all of the issues that we're addressing around migration,
my point is, you keep using...
I have to say, I did not expect to be asked about the product regulation and meteorology.
This is exactly the point. You guys think we don't pay attention. Look, my point is that this piece of regulation, it may seem like something marginal and nerdy, but essentially what it does is give ministers the power to decide that you can change the rules to get into alignment with the EU, which is one of the things you said you would never do.
No, so look, there is some principles here, and I think these are the ones that I've rehearsed already. So we're not returning to the single market, not returning to the customs union, not returning to free movement. We need to get net migration coming down, so that's really important. And then within those, we've got those red lines, but what we also want to do is to reduce some of the bureaucracy, some of the additional burdens on businesses. That's the right thing to do. So I think actually the fact that we want to champion businesses, the fact that building that growth as part of the plan for change the Prime Minister's set out, all of that is incredibly important. And I think businesses across the country would support that.
All right.
Rather than...
OK. You slightly surprised me that you hadn't read the bill, but anyway. All right, let's just talk about growth, which is the Chancellor's been talking about this week. The Scottish courts this week blocked oil and gas extraction from 2 North Sea fields, but said the companies could reapply for the licences as soon as the government amends its licences. Just the guidelines, I beg your pardon. Can you reassure the energy companies this morning that you're going to make it possible for them to get drilling as soon as it's physically possible?
So, look, there's the court process, which I think, from memory, was also linked to a previous Supreme Court decision. And
Correct.
So there's that process all has to be worked through and so on. But again, you go back to the principles, which is the UK government committed to supporting business, to working with businesses to deliver growth. Alongside that, we need to make sure that we are meeting our clean power commitments as part of the plan for change and support businesses as we do.
But this is very concrete. Do you want these companies, Shell and the other 2 others involved, to be able to drill in the Jackdaw and Rosebank oil fields, yes or no? The legal processes have to be worked through. Those were decisions for the courts. But we've said that existing licences need to be able to carry on, but we also need to be able to move to clean power. So that's yes. Let me ask you about another potential issue on growth. On Thursday, the Chancellor cited the £450 million AstraZeneca development plan for Merseyside as evidence of Britain's bright future under Labour. On Friday, AstraZeneca canned the development. They said that they weren't going to go ahead, and I'm quoting here, amongst their reasons, the timing and reduction of the final offer compared to the previous government's proposal. You guys blew it, didn't you?
Well, and I understand that AstraZeneca had also changed some of their proposals, but I think the
they're pretty clear. They said it's government.
Look, I obviously wasn't involved in those conversations, but I understand there were some changes. But what you also have to look at is a whole series of investment announcements, including a £9 billion contract for Rolls-Royce. That is having a huge impact. You've got the announcements now, the IMF upgrading the growth forecasts, and also evidence that now businesses are saying that the UK is one of the best places.
Yeah, but the Tories made AstraZeneca an offer which you didn't fulfil. That's a point.
Well, I think that the proposal had changed from AstraZeneca, but it's not obviously one that I was involved in. But I think what you have seen is, alongside the work work to fix the difficult foundations, a lot of work with business on getting that increase in business investment, which has now shot up, and we've got one of the highest levels of business investment taking place for years. That's really important. It will take time to have an impact. But
sorry to interrupt you, but let's go to your own territory here, which is legal migration. The Office of National Statistics said this week that the UK population is going to rise by 4.9 million over the decade to 2032, fastest rise in our lifetimes. Is that what you want? And that's all going to be through immigration. Is that what you want to happen?
Well, we want net migration to come down. And it needs to. It shot up, it quadrupled under the Conservatives in the space of just 4 years. That was a series of...
But this is a forecast for your time in office.
Well, yeah, but those the statistical forecasts are based on the history of the last few years and what has happened. We are clear that net migration needs to come down. Big driver behind the increase in net migration has been overseas recruitment. And overseas recruitment has shot up in a series of areas where training has fallen and where actually we've seen fewer UK working-age residents in the labour market. So a series of policy failures that's then led to this really relaxed free market approach to allowing businesses to just be able to recruit from overseas instead of training in the UK.
Yeah, but
so we're going to drawing up a white paper which is about how you better link the immigration system to training and skills obligations.
With respect, all your predecessors in the seat also said there's going to be training. It takes time to train.
Well, no, you've got to link them. You've got to link them together.
I know, but
they didn't. They never did. They said training, and then actually what they did was training plummeted, and net migration soared because they just lost control of the system. They didn't have proper checks in place.
You're saying you want to bring down net migration. Your colleague Angela Rayner wants to build 1.5 million houses. The construction bosses, I'm going to show you this, say that we need 96,000 extra construction workers every year. But the number of construction workers per thousand population is dropping, actually. No amount of finagling is going to change that. You're not going to change that in the next couple of years. So how do you manage this? What are you going to do? You need people to build homes. They're going to have to come from abroad, but that's what Rachel Reeves needs. You want to bring down the numbers. You can't do both at the same time.
Well, that's exactly why what you have to do is link the immigration system and the training and skills system. So the new way in which we would need this to work is the Migration Advisory Committee, which looks at issues around visas, makes advice on shortage occupations, needs to be properly linked to Skills England, that draws up training plans, needs to be properly linked to workforce plans, for example.
That is all going to take time. Why don't you do the simple thing? You could reduce the flow by making it harder for immigrant workers to bring their families. The Conservatives plan to double the salary threshold needed to support a spouse or a dependent to £40,000. Now, you've put a pause on that. Why don't you just adopt their policy and actually bring down the numbers now rather than waiting for people to be trained and all of that?
Well, the numbers are coming down now, and we are continuing with the increase in the salary threshold, the restriction on
You are going to increase
dependents,
the salary threshold?
The skilled worker salary threshold, we have supported the increase. We actually called for it to increase before the previous government put it forward. We also called for the removal of the 20% discount, the unfair wage discount for people being recruited from abroad. That was something the Conservatives brought in after 2019. We called for it to be removed. It has been removed. We're sustaining that. We've also continuing with restrictions, for example, on bringing dependents for graduate students and for social care workers. So all of those measures are in place. We're currently drawing up further measures that will particularly target these areas that you rightly talked about, whether that be in IT, be in construction, it be in engineering, where for far too long we have been recruiting from abroad and failing to train here in the UK. So there has to be, I think, more requirements on employers. For employers who are wanting to be able to recruit from abroad, actually what they should be doing instead is showing that they are training and recruiting here in the UK.
One last question. which is about combating illegal immigration. Tony Blair, mostly overstayers, actually. Tony Blair says digital identity credentials, the digital ID card. Are you in favour of that?
So non-UK resident or non-UK citizens already have to have biometric residence permits, already to have. What will effectively be with the rollout of e-visas is digital ID. The problem is it's hardly ever checked until now. So we have, since the election, increased raids on illegal working by 30%, increased arrests by 25%.
But what about the digital ID cards for everybody?
Well, that's what...
That would allow you to distinguish.
I know, but as Trevor, I just explained, Trevor, people who are non-UK citizens already have to have the ID and the cards, but they're never checked. So you could have all the ID in the world, but if nobody actually ever checks, then there's no proper system to make sure the rules are respected and enforced. Since the election, the biggest change we have done already in 6 months is to increase enforcement, to increase returns. 16,500 people returned since the election of people who had no right to be in the UK. It's really important we support a proper, fair, working immigration system because people have always come to this country from all over the world to work, to study, but the system has to be enforced. It hasn't been for too long, and that's what we're doing.
Home Secretary, thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks, Trevor.
Let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by the crossbench peer and FT columnist Camilla Cavendish, the former BBC Director-General and FA Chair Greg Dyke, and Brexiteer former Northern Ireland Minister Steve Baker. Let's just start briefly, if we may, with this announced this morning about child abuse and AI. Yvette Cooper made clear that this is an important thing to them. Do you have any worries, Camilla, about the issue of freedom of expression and privacy around here, around this issue?
Well, I think it's really hard to be against wanting to crack down on child abuse images, Trevor. I mean, I don't know if it's enforceable because some of this terrible material is filmed abroad. So there's a real question at the border of what you do, you know, how do you police that? It's not actually filmed in this country. But I agree, I'm sure there are privacy issues around it. I think she wants to make it illegal to possess, create or distribute this material. So I suppose the issue you're referring to would be the possess.
Possess, correct.
I'm not so sure. I don't know what everyone else thinks. I think it's quite hard to be against.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it must be right to ban AI-generated child porn. Of course it is. To keep it on sort of Sunday morning territory, if you put into an image generator, an AI image generator, that you'd like Trevor Phillips in a tutu, and give it a picture of Trevor Phillips, it will put Trevor Phillips in a tutu.
And that happens all the time.
Yeah, but this is the problem, right? Because people can imagine what other prompts might say, given pictures of children. And it sickens me, and it must be banned, and they'll have to work out how to enforce it.
OK. Greg, you agree?
I disagree with you, I think. I mean, I think that if there's a balance between freedom on the one hand and child pornography, then you've got to come down against the freedom, I think. I don't think it's an issue of principle to fight on.
All right. The big story of the week has been growth. The Chancellor's been out there saying the growth trumps everything else. Problem. Thursday, AstraZeneca, hurrah, hurrah. Friday, AstraZeneca, gone. Steve?
Well, unfortunately, a number of really big industries in the world parade around the world with nation-states competing to subsidise to attract them, and pharmaceuticals is just one such. And we were obviously willing to offer a greater grant and subsidy to AstraZeneca than Labour.
We being the Conservative
government, yes. No, I'm not in favour of firms getting taxpayer money to be in countries. I think we should be able to attract them through our tax regime, allow them to invest capital for a safe return. But it's absolutely right. The rhetoric is absolutely right. We've got to go for growth. Just the unfunded pension liabilities of the public sector and the state pension are enough to bankrupt this country in our lifetimes. And we absolutely have to go for growth. And that is going to need a transformational renewal of this country, and it's going to have to be what the next government does, because Labour's policies do not match their rhetoric.
Camilla, do you agree that growth is all, but can they manage it?
Well, I think the problem for Rachel Reeves is that growth is clearly not all. In the first 6 months of this government, they've put they've raised national insurance contributions, which I think is actually understandable to the extent that they were in a hole and they had to raise some tax. But for businesses, the combination of that with raising the living wage and this employment rights bill is really toxic. And most of the businesses that I talk to are seriously asking what they're going to have to do, whether they're going to actually go on hiring the same number of people they do now. And the workers' rights bill, still, it's a very long shopping list of policies, a few of which would make work more secure. There's a few good things in there, I think, in fire and rehire or zero-hours contracts. But the vast bulk of it would really take us back to way before Tony Blair took us out of the social chapter of the European Union, for example. I mean, it's basically going to give day one rights to people to claim, for example, unfair dismissal. It's going to really hobble businesses at a time when the government is trying to encourage investment.
So you get rights before your probation period is over?
Yes, and these things are really tough.
Greg?
Well, I think we're living in a world where all politicians now say what we've got to do is go for growth. Do they understand how to do it and how to get there? And I'm not sure and who does understand how to do it and how to get there.
There's a wonderful new book's just come out called Return to Growth by Conservative peer John Moynihan. I've just reviewed it. It'll be in House Magazine shortly. Well, it is a magnificent book which tells you what the problem is and how to fix it.
So you're going to give us a plan.
There's so much for the ad. But
I think that is the real issue. Are we in a low-growth society forever? I mean, you know, what makes us believe that you're going to get to a higher growth society? In which case, what sort of society is it? Seems to me the discussion we're going to have. Because clearly, politicians are going to find themselves, as you did, kicked out because they didn't achieve the growth that was promised. And I think there's a very real danger of that.
She, of course, Yvette Cooper was, I suppose, rather clear that they're not changing their position on the EU and relations with the EU. Now, I know, Steve, you're supported Brexit, but given what we've heard this morning from the United States, is there a case for changing our views on this? Yvette Cooper seemed to think not.
Well, no, because it would be a betrayal of the vote that people had. The fundamental issue was, did we want to be within or outside the EU's legal structures? So if we were in the single market, the EEA, or the customs union, we would have repudiated that result. And it's a terrible idea to open that can of worms. I think it's worth saying that Donald Trump has told us that he offered Theresa May a free trade agreement with the USA, which we didn't take because at the time she and the Cabinet had not resolved where we wanted to be on customs. We just need to put those fundamentals behind us. What's coming up is the 5-year review of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. And in the context of the reset which we achieved through the Northern Ireland Agreement, the Windsor Framework, there is an enormous opportunity to improve the agreement. I went to see the German...
That's interesting. So you think that there's a possibility of a reset of relations with the EU?
Look, if I was a government minister right now, today, and I was doing it, I'd be putting in place a whole range of new things which would be worth doing. Opportunities which weren't possible because of the atmospherics, like mutual recognition of qualifications. Simple things.
Camilla.
So I think we've seen something completely extraordinary today, which is all the people who said Trump wasn't serious about tariffs have suddenly, including his own Treasury Secretary, have had to suddenly stop and look at what's happening. And I suppose the worry for the world is that it was that sort of protectionism which actually drove America into the Great Depression in the 1930s. So we have to look very carefully at where we're standing right now. Presumably, this kind of approach to tariffs will actually unlock inflation in America, and Donald Trump will not want inflation to get too high, and so at some point he will start to step back. But I think it does leave the UK particularly exposed because we have decided to go it alone. We are not part of the EU bloc. We are not close to America. And I disagree with Steve. I don't actually think there was never much that could be in a free trade agreement with America. We don't actually want chlorinated chicken. Honestly, and I'm not being glib, there really wasn't much that could be in a free trade agreement. So, you know, this is where we find ourselves, and I think some form of close relationship with the EU has got to be a positive thing.
Greg?
Well, I think leaving the EU was a disaster for this country. I really do. And it's interesting, the Brexiteers, when you talk to them about it, they'll say, yes, but they accept that it hasn't gone well. And then they say, but we didn't do it the right way. Well, tell me what the right way of leaving was. I don't know the right way of leaving.
But
I think I watch Trump and I think, is this all tactics? Is this a game?
Yeah.
It's like, I've said many times about Trump, it is like meeting the bloke in the pub who sits in the corner with a pint of beer and just has a view of everything. Yeah. And actually, we've made him president of the United States, so he can actually do some of these things.
Well, OK, we'll return to the art of the deal, or possibly not, a bit later. But it is now 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, the Home Secretary's told this programme that she'll introduce new laws to criminalise making AI-generated images of child abuse. Yvette Cooper said she also wanted a closer relationship with Europe, but joining a customs union remains a red line. Lots more to come this morning. Shortly, we'll hear from the Shadow Business Secretary, Andrew Griffith. Plus, we'll talk growth, immigration, and attacks from the world's richest man with Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey. And with the Prime Minister heading to Brussels tomorrow, what will his promised reset of EU relations look like? We'll talk to the EU's Foreign Affairs Committee Chair, the German MEP David McAllister. Right, let's turn to the Conservatives now. Just before we started the programme, I spoke to the Shadow Business Secretary, Andrew Griffith. Andrew Griffith, President Trump has imposed tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China, and we could be next. Prime Minister's in Brussels tomorrow. Now, what have you thought about Brexit? Is this a moment that we should be drawing closer to the EU?
Not especially. I mean, there's a lot of jeopardy for the United Kingdom from what we saw overnight. You know, if the world goes into this era of increasing tariffs, the United Kingdom depends upon free trade. We don't run particular trade deficits with the United States. But clearly, our economy needs all the help it can get at the moment. After this government has come in, they've destroyed confidence, put up taxes. They're proposing lots of extra red tape. So the economy needs help. And one of the big opportunities for the UK right now would be to get much closer to the US, our biggest trading partner. We have a trade deal with the European Union already. So alongside that, a trade deal with the US would be a big win. So I'm not, it's always good to talk, Trevor, but I'm not sure now is the best time for the UK to be putting all of its efforts into talking to the EU rather than with the US.
Yeah, but if Mr. Trump is ready to impose tariffs on his closest neighbour, I mean, literally couldn't be closer to Canada, we must be vulnerable. And surely there is a case for reducing the frictions of trade with the EU.
Well, there's always a case for reducing trade frictions, but the biggest single trading partner that we don't have a trade deal with at the moment is the US. It's not the EU. We have a trade deal there. So, as I say, it's not that it's bad to talk to anybody, but it feels like there's an awful lot of talk going on to the EU, and all we've got with the US is trying to offend them over the decision to give away the Chagos Islands. Lots of student politician comments in the past, sending a very political ambassador instead of a Foreign Office professional, and actually very little FaceTime as far as one can see so far going on.
Let's just stick to the trade and not the politics at the moment. The point is that Mr. Starmer is going to talk to the EU, and there must be a case for saying, let's at least try to make it smoother, because it's a big market, it's close to us. We know that since Brexit, trade with the EU's fallen. That's helped our economy to stutter. Surely there must be some advantages to having this better relationship. And you seem to be suggesting that yourself.
Yeah, as I said, it's always good to remove friction. Some of those frictions were imposed not as a consequence of Brexit, but, you know, by individual countries within the EU pursuing particular agendas. Okay, so we've laid down some very clear lines as to what we think, if you're going to have those conversations, the government should focus on.
I want to come to that, but I just want to be clear that if the opportunity arose, you would support a close trading relationship with the EU.
Subject to our clear red lines, and it's important to know what they are. So no return to freedom of movement, no additional finances leaving this country, no rule-taking again from European courts. There's always been conversations. There's been conversations under each Conservative previous administration to try and remove some of those frictions. They were not necessarily consequences of Brexit, but they were things that the EU imposed, because essentially it's quite protectionist.
The reason I'm asking you about this is that since Brexit, it's pretty clear that opinion in the country has changed. And let me show you this. When people are asked whether we should rejoin the EU, whether we should have a closer relationship, it's pretty unequivocal. 55% think we should rejoin. Half think we should join a single market if we were able to, rejoin a customs union. And most of all, 62% think Brexit was a failure.
Well, I don't think Brexit was a failure. I think, first of all, the ability to make one's own laws, which is something that most modern states have, is never a failure. That's part of democracy. Secondly, we've already seen some real benefits from Brexit. We've concluded 73...
Like
well, with 73, but I'm just going to go on to that. 73 trade deals in the area that I was responsible for in government.
Yeah, but most of those were rollovers. They existed before, and all you did was roll them over.
And many were, and many weren't. As responsible for our financial services industry, one of our biggest industries in the UK, something that we really, really depend on growing our economy, I was able, as the UK minister, to make a whole set of improvements to improve the competitiveness of our financial services because of those Brexit freedoms that we had. Otherwise, we were a rule taker, one of 28 countries, making rules that weren't necessarily the best for the fact pattern of businesses that we had in the UK. And so many other things. I mean, it's invariably the case that one starts to go through a long list of all the things we've done, and then people interrupt and say, well, there isn't a very long list, Trevor.
I'm trying not to interrupt you, but I just want to, if I may, put this to you. This is a response that Brexiteer, people who supported Brexit in your party always give. But the truth of the matter is, the country has moved against you. And the consequence, by the way, of saying, let's look at where you are on the polls right now, is that you've now actually fallen behind reform in the polls. And the point I want to put to you is, you can't face both ways. You can't be saying, we like a closer relationship, but actually Brexit was a great thing. Shouldn't you actually now be clear that whether the Conservative Party now still stands by Brexit or whether it wants to be a bit closer to the EU?
Look, I've been very clear. Always try to reduce frictions wherever they exist. By far, the biggest opportunity for us right now is to go and seek a trade agreement with the United States, our largest trading partner by far. But if there are frictions that were put on the United Kingdom by some certain countries in Europe and the Commission as a result of Brexit, by all means try and reduce those frictions. Many of them should never have been there in the first place, Trevor.
All right. And I noticed, by the way, amongst the tests that your leaders set that you've mentioned, the one that isn't there is withdrawal from the European Convention of Human Rights.
Well, that's not a question for the conversations that Keir Starmer is having with the European 27 leaders tomorrow. Actually, that's supposed to, he says that's supposed to be about security and defence. I would just question the body language of just constantly rushing off to talk to other European leaders when there's a lot of work to be done in the US. There's a lot of student political comments to overturn of the past.
Where is your party on that question?
Well, we'll formulate a coherent set of policies that will deal with the whole issue of not just the European Court of Human Rights, but other international treaties, other sources of law, as well as the encroachment of UK law. This whole tendency to sort of shop around, opinion shop, and find different fragments of international laws and treaties and import them into the UK.
In a way, the point I put to you before. I ask you, where are you on the European Convention of Human Rights? There could be a yes or no answer there. But the answer you're giving on all of these questions aren't sceptical enough for the people who've defected to reform, and they aren't Euro-enthusiastic enough for people who voted remain. So actually, Conservative Party doesn't seem to quite know what it wants to do about Europe anymore.
No, I don't think that's true at all. I think that the Conservative Party is the party that delivered Brexit. It's the party that started to make the most of many of our freedoms, but there's a long, long way to go. It's a project of multiple periods in government, and we were derailed by COVID. There are lots of opportunities, and the one thing I'm very, very clear about is that, you know, compared with all of this taking us back to the past, talking about Brexit, which was just the start of a process, the big opportunity right now, you know, where the Prime Minister should be re-diverting his plane tomorrow, lies in Washington with the US, our single largest trading partner.
OK, look, the big news of this week was the ONS population projections. We'll have a rise of 5 million people in this country over the next 7 years, all through immigration, which actually Brexit was supposed to bring down. Net immigration quadrupled since during the period when you were a person of great influence. You were Prime Minister's Chief Business Advisor, Director of Prime Minister's Policy Unit, you were a Trade Minister, a Treasury Minister, a Minister for Science. And during the period you were in office, we quadrupled net migration. And the numbers are still rising. What was the point?
Well, we've been very clear. The Conservative Party is under new management. Immigration was too high. There were many failings in that immigration system in that period of time. The data itself, if you go back further, during the period of freedom,
I want to go back to where
I bet you don't. But during the period of
charge.
freedom, during the period of freedom of movement, the ONS, the Home Office, estimated that 3 million people came here.
And you promised that
there's a real problem with the
come
data,
down.
Trevor.
Well, there's a real problem with the data.
Well,
the ONS data year after year.
The level of running immigration, even before that period, was much higher than official statistics were capturing. So,
come on. And I can tell you from memory, 2019 numbers were 206,000 net. By last year, there were 900,000.
Yeah, and we said that's completely wrong.
Your watch.
And we said that's wrong. That there should be
your policy.
There should be, well, with respect, there should be a cap on immigration, and that the system failed. The system of constant legal challenge, the failure of the Home Office to implement policies from a directly elected government, and yes, there were some failures of the government itself in terms
Brexit.
of.
You had 8 years to fix that. The point I'm really trying to get to here is that you take a position on Brexit. You say it was a success, but the single thing
I said there's more work to be done.
No, come on. The single thing that you really pushed and won the referendum on, which was you would bring down immigration, actually, you did exactly the opposite. You had the fastest rise in net migration in our recorded history.
Well, as I say, I fully accept there were failures. There were failures to properly get to grips with many of the challenges. The scope for law courts to undermine the policies of elected governments, failures within the system, within the Home Office, and yes, failures within our government, which is why it's important that we're under new leadership. We've got a very clear policy about a cap on immigration. We've said that this is our home, not a hotel, and that things must be different. And at the next election, we must present a credible plan, show me, not trust me, in order to get to grips with that issue. But there is an important point, is that large-scale mass immigration happened for a long time before that period.
All right.
And you know that because the Home Office was forecasting 3 million people came here during this period of open borders. Actually, by the time they ended up finished counting the figures, it was closer to 7 million.
Andrew Griffith, thanks for your time this morning. Well, we've been talking a lot about Europe today. One party that's very positive in its desire for a much closer relationship with the EU is the Lib Dems. And I can speak to their leader, Ed Davey, now. Good morning, Sir Ed.
Good morning, Trevor.
Let's start by talking about growth. And I want to clear away a couple of small issues you can get out of the way with a yes or no answer. Are you going to back a third runway at Heathrow?
No.
OK, that's clear. Should the government give the green light to the Jackdaw?
I can give you explanation why, but you wanted a short answer. So,
no, I love it. So let me ask you my second question. Should the government give the green light to the Rosebank and Jackdaw oil fields?
No, I think it has to look at that again. It's actually quite a complicated issue because of the legal contracts that were entered into. But I do not think we should see a massive expansion of oil and gas exploration in the North Sea, no.
So to be clear, the oil companies shouldn't, you would prefer them not to be drilling there?
Absolutely.
OK, last one. Should the government be reimposing housing targets on local authorities?
Well, again, a little bit more complicated. Basically, the answer is no. It needs to work with local authorities so that they increase the number of homes that they can build. And they'll need to do that by ensuring that the infrastructure is there, the sewers, the roads, the hospitals, the GPs, the schools. And I think if you do that, you can get communities to buy into more infrastructure. That's what Liberal Democrat councils have been doing, and we've been building a lot more homes, including social homes. So it is more complicated. Liberal Democrats have a community-led approach, so we can get the housing targets up.
Ed Davey, you're in danger of becoming my favourite politician by giving an answer to an actual question. But let me just check one thing. You're clearly not fancying Rachel Reeves's growth agenda very much. And your last answer, unkind people might read that as, the NIMBY Lib Dems are back in fashion.
Well, if they did, they misunderstood me. And let me be clear, there are parts of Rachel Reeves's growth strategy that we agree with. We do need more infrastructure, whether it's on energy, where Liberal Democrats actually led the way, whether it's on aspects of transport, particularly railway infrastructure, and housing. And if you look at Liberal Democrats' record, I could give you a whole list of councils where we are building and have built a lot more housing. I can give you examples where we've championed different forms of infrastructure. So the key thing here, Trevor, is to switch from being NIMBYs to YIMBYs to yes in my backyard. And the way you'll do that is by taking communities with you. My worry is there's a lack of trust in politics at the moment. And if we impose things on communities without taking them with us, that lack of trust is going to get worse. That would damage our democracy even more. And I can point you to many examples where people have taken communities with them and have built the infrastructure.
All right. You're calling this morning for the government to order an independent cost-benefit analysis of a closer trading relationship with the EU. Forgive me for putting it this way. It's a bit wimpish, isn't it? You obviously just want a closer relationship. Why don't you just say, we want a new customs arrangement, we want to be in with the EU?
We've said that. In the last general election manifesto, we were easily the most pro-European of the political parties. I said it on many programmes. And I made a speech just a week or so ago calling for a UK-EU customs union. And the reason is this. Many people are really worried about the cost of living still. Many people are worried about our public services and where's the growth going to come from to pay for the investment we need in our health and our schools and so on. And it's really clear to me that a UK-EU customs union is the best way and the quickest way of getting that growth to lower the prices so people's shopping baskets aren't so expensive, and to get the growth so we get the tax revenues in so we can afford the social care reforms that Liberal Democrats are championing, for example. So we really do want that UK-EU customs union, and I've been advocating it very strongly.
And you'd be prepared to accept what we know already would be the EU's price for that, which is more freedom of movement between the UK and the EU?
Well, actually, that's not quite true. The freedom of movement comes with a single market, not the customs union. You are right to say, however, that the EU has proposed a youth mobility scheme, which has been rejected by both the Conservatives and Labour parties. We think it's a really good idea. We want to negotiate it. We're not quite convinced of some of the details that are on the table, but I think there's a negotiation there. And the reason why is that we do want our young people in our country, British young people, to be able to travel and work and study and live across the European neighbours. And we also think that employers here would benefit from some of the talents that we could have to help, again, boost our economy. But the youth mobility scheme is different from free movement to labour.
Let me ask you about a curious thing. It's a matter of curiosity for me about your position on the EU. Right now, the European Union's leading members are led by people like Giorgia Meloni, Viktor Orban, parties like Sweden Democrats. There's a chance of Marine Le Pen coming into power in France, and a great likelihood that the AfD will be very influential in Germany in 3 weeks' time after the elections. Is that the European Union you dreamed of getting close to?
Look, sometimes countries who are your long-standing allies have people in charge you don't agree with. So I don't agree with President Trump, but I think we have to try to get a deal with him and try to work with him, probably in different ways than we've dealt with past presidents. And equally in Europe, there are, as you quite rightly say, some prime ministers, presidents in EU countries whose views I don't share, and Liberal Democrats don't share. However, our nations share similar interests. There's a war on the European continent, and the vast majority of those more right-wing leaders that you mentioned in Europe are against Putin's invasion on Ukraine. They realise it threatens our defence and security. And one of the ways I'm making the case, whether it's on the UK-EU customs union or more cooperation with our European allies more broadly, is because our trade, prosperity and economic prospects depend on better relations than the Conservatives managed to achieve. In fact, they completely made those relations appalling. Plus, through NATO and through something called the Joint Expeditionary Force, JEF, we can work with our European neighbours far more effectively to make sure we have the defence and security our country needs.
Forgive me for hurrying you up, Ed Davey, but I just want to take 30 seconds to give you the chance to answer something. I guess you're now internationally famous, having been described by Elon Musk as a snivelling cretin. Would you like to respond?
Listen, Trevor, I've been in politics so long enough to know that there are insults made, and I'm sometimes not always complimentary about people like Elon Musk. However, the real issue of substance is that Elon Musk said that the British government, elected by the British people just a few months ago, should be overthrown. That's what he said. And he's now in the administration in America. He's sort of camped out in Trump's Oval Office. And I think that's a real matter of concern. And he didn't like it when I said, when he says those things, Britain, through our ambassadors, through our government relations, need to call him out. And I repeat, I think Elon Musk needs to be held to account, both by President Trump for the comments he made about the UK, and actually this world's richest man who has all this power with his social media platform and now, the best friend of the new President of the United States, is incredibly powerful, and I think he has to be held to account. And Britain, with our relationship with Europe, and Britain with our relationship with our European colleagues, needs to make sure that calling out these over-powerful billionaire US tech magnates like Elon Trump, we can't allow them to get away with what they're trying to get away with. It's too damaging.
I'm sorry we've got to call a halt there, but thank you so much for that response.
Thank you.
Next, we'll get the view from our panel on all of that.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. I've witnessed migration across Europe close up.
I'm James Matthews and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Free, wherever you get your news.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Seagal?
I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent. Sky News, the full story first.
migrants risk their lives climbing aboard these trains in search of a dream, the United States.
It's really dangerous. They often get robbed on this train.
They suffer a lot by police, cartels.
What happens to them next, we just don't know. Do you miss your mum?
With Trump coming to the presidency, how much longer will people be accommodated?
The journey you've been through, it's been very difficult at times. Has it been worth it?
See. This is a journey which goes by one name, the Beast.
Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety.
We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming.
I'm Deborah Hames, Sky Security and Defence Editor. Should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Back to our panel, Camilla Cavendish, Greg Dyke, Steve Baker. Steve, forgive me if I got the wrong impression, but Ed Davey seemed to be, in principle, in favour of growth, but against anything that might promote it.
The Lib Dems, as usual, absolutely shameless, will say anything for a vote anywhere they can. This is why they did badly out of being in coalition with us, because real life caught up with them. In Wickham, they were shameless about one site in particular in 2015 where they opposed all housing, and they are ridiculous. The truth is that the public oppose house building because it imposes costs on them for no benefit. And what we need to do is change the way that we control land use so that the public actually participate in the benefits of building. It's a speech I made back in about 2011 when it was an issue in Wickham, and it was very popular with the public, but I'm sure we haven't got time for me to say it again now.
Sadly, Steve, no. We can't actually replay your speech. I'll ask if anybody's...
fill the programme.
You know, at the end of the programme.
I think he's wrong on housing. Ed, I think if we want to build a lot more houses in this country, you're going to have to tell local authorities there's an expectation from you to build in your area. And I think that in some ways helps local authorities because it means they can blame someone else as part of the NIMBY argument. But
there's no way to go on.
You say it's no way to go on. If not, we're not going to build any houses. We've got to build more houses.
Yeah.
And that does mean taking quite radical decisions in this country about greenbelt, about all sorts of other things. But we're way behind, and we've got to build more houses, and we've got to do it quickly.
Camilla, the thing he was sounded uncompromising about was the EU. We want to be back in the embrace, in a sense.
Well, yes, but it was really strange, given the Liberal Democrats' position. He didn't just say we want to have the full fat deal again. I mean, to say, we want to be in just the customs union, I was actually surprised because, and we can talk about whether that's workable or not, but I mean, I think the Liberal Democrats would be better off in many ways just saying, we'd like to have the full fat deal. I mean, we all know that Brussels probably would never offer the UK that and that there are issues. But I think otherwise, I'm not sure what their message is, really.
Steve?
He seems not to understand the EU's institutions. Or he feigns not to, but he wants to be in the customs union, but not the single market. That is the position that Turkey is in, and it is not a position fit for the United Kingdom to have our trade policy controlled by the European Union. But this is talking about his position. His position is that we shouldn't be in the EEA, so we'd still have all the non-tariff barriers to trade which go with being in the customs union but not the EEA. I'm afraid these details are very boring but are very, very important, and they seem to be lost on Ed Davey.
Greg, let's go back to Andrew Griffith and the Tories. I've got to say that I'm not that often surprised, but I was surprised the extent to which Andrew Griffith didn't seem to be ready to engage with the fact that the Brexit was sold on the promise that we bring down immigration. And I'm not saying yes or no, but the fact of the matter, it went up dramatically between 2019 and 2024. Can Kimmy Badenoch's Conservatives get away with holding the position we weren't there?
Oh no, but nobody believes that, do they? I mean, that interview was quite interesting, but irrelevant. Because
thank you, I just wasted my time.
Yeah, well, I think you did. I think you could have spent 10 minutes on... Well, you've got to put the Tories on sometimes, haven't you? No, I think it was... immigration is a massive issue worldwide. It's, you look at what happened in the United States, and I mean, immigration was one of the factors why Trump won. Immigration is an issue across most of Europe. It's an issue here. And I don't think governments yet know what to do about it and how to do it. And I think that's got to, somehow you almost need an intelligent discussion about the numbers that a society can take in a particular period without creating all sorts of crises, but particularly without creating a right-wing party that gets control. And that's the danger, I think, in all sorts of places, that immigration leads to a very right-wing government.
And we can see that, the next Chancellor of Austria, for example, will come from the Freedom Party. Camilla, as David Cameron's brain, as it were, head of policy and so on, you must have had to wrestle with this dilemma. The economics, growth, who does the jobs, versus the social impact of immigration.
Yes, absolutely. And we are in a fix, aren't we, at the moment? We have, I think, 9 million people who are economically inactive. We're desperate for growth and productivity. We know we need migrants to come into the NHS, but we have successive governments who keep promising to cap immigration. So it is not at all surprising that a lot of people who are leaning towards reform aren't listening to either of the two major parties, because the truth is they feel like they've been hearing the same stuff from both major parties for 20 years. I think if you go back to Brexit, I mean, it was take back control was the slogan.
It was.
And this is what this really applies to. I mean, we've learned in the past year that we don't even know in this country, actually, who is here and who's not. We don't have border controls. We don't actually know how many people are here illegally. We don't even know, because we've just had a new revision from the Office for National Statistics, how many people are here legally. And I think a lot of people, whatever they feel about immigration and whether it's good or bad, they do want to believe that their government knows who's here. And one of the things that the Johnson government did, of course, was it introduced the graduate visa, which sounds wonderful, but it's actually bringing quite low-skilled people who don't have to meet any of the other thresholds.
OK. We've got to pay the bill. We'll return to this. Next, I'll be joined by the Chair of the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, David McAllister.
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks. I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
It seems that many politicians here want a closer relationship with Europe. And the thing about relationships, of course, it takes two to tango. So would the other side be as keen? Well, let's ask the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee Chair, David McAllister. Good morning, Mr. McAllister.
Good morning from northern Germany.
The leader of the CDU has toughened up his language on immigration to the point where the anti-immigration AfD in Germany feels comfortable backing his proposals on migration. Does that mean that the so-called firewall against cooperation with the AfD has been burned through?
No, we have been very clear, CDU and CSU, that we will not form a coalition with the AfD. After the elections, there will be no form of cooperation. This was our announcement. This will be our announcement after the elections on the 23rd of February. What happened this week in the Bundestag was that the CDU-CSU presented a draft law on immigration, and we did the right thing, even though we got support from perhaps the wrong side. The problem was that Social Democrats and Greens, for tactical reasons, were not ready to support our draft law, even though what we had proposed, is common sense, and it has a huge consensus in the German public. That means to limit immigration, to suspend family reunion for those who are not entitled to stay in Germany, and to strengthen the rights of our federal border police.
So, OK, so the firewall hasn't collapsed, but it must be under some strain because we're seeing parties of the anti-immigrant right finding their way into government in Sweden, in the Netherlands, in Austria, possibly in France, and indeed already in some German regions. Has the strategy of trying to freeze these parties out of power failed?
Well, I can only speak for the situation in Germany, and here it is absolutely clear that there will be no form of cooperation at all with the AfD. Why? Because the so-called alternative for Germany is anti-EU, anti-NATO, pro-Putin. They are questioning the fundamentals of the Federal Republic of Germany. For us as CDU, the AfD is our political enemy number one.
And by the way, just very quickly, one of the things we're not familiar with here is a left-wing anti-immigration party. You have one, the Sarah Wagenknecht party. No cooperation with them either?
No, the same thing applies. The BSW, the party of Sarah Wagenknecht, is on the one hand a far left-leaning party, but on the other hand, they are rather right-wing on immigration. But the reason why we also exclude any kind of cooperation with Sarah Wagenknecht's party is because they are also anti-EU, anti-NATO, and pro-Putin.
OK. Well, let's talk about your friendship with the EU. Keir Starmer is heading toward you in Brussels tomorrow. Is there room and appetite for a new relationship with the UK at the EU end?
Well, 5 years after Brexit, we still miss the United Kingdom, we still miss our British counterparts in the European institutions, and we still regret what happened 5 years. But since then, we have worked on moving things forward, and with the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement, we have a solid legal foundation for our new relationship. The European Union has always been clear. We are not ready to renegotiate agreed treaties, but of course there is room to add further policy fields to our cooperation. We are ready, but we are now waiting for concrete proposals coming from the British side.
Well, what would you look for from the British side? What would you want to make that new relationship work better?
Well, the Prime Minister is invited to Brussels on Monday, and the heads of state and government will be discussing security and defence-related issues. And I think this is some really low-hanging fruit. Of course, we could improve our cooperation on security and defence. We all know that we will have to spend more on security and defence in the next years. We will have to do more for our own security and defence. And here I would be very passionately in favour of trying to find the closest possible cooperation between the EU, the 27 member states, and the United Kingdom, because the UK is not simply a third country for us, it's a rock-solid NATO ally. And we have seen, since the war started against Ukraine, this war, Russian war of aggression, how close our cooperation is and what kind of potential there is. This is something where we can move things forward.
The sticking point has always been trade and movement of people. Would the price for improvements at the margins on trade, customs, all of that, be some concessions from the UK on freedom of movement?
Brussels is still waiting for the new Labour government to present concrete proposals how we can improve our relationship. In the meantime, senior Commission officials have made some proposals, have presented some ideas where we see further room for cooperation when it comes to a veterinary agreement, when it comes to the youth mobility scheme, or defence and space. But the ball is definitely now in the British court because, as we saw this morning, once again, the Home Secretary was rather cautious, for instance, in reacting to our ideas when it comes to improving
well, she was more than cautious. She just said no to a youth mobility scheme.
Well, we're still waiting for concrete proposals coming from the British side. Labour did make quite a number of promising announcements for the elections. Since then, we haven't heard too much from them, have we?
I see, you're an optimist. Let's just deal with what's happened this morning. Mr. Trump has imposed tariffs on the entry of goods from Mexico and Canada, as well as China, to the United States. We don't know whether this is just a negotiating ploy, but how seriously do you take the threat of something similar happening to the EU?
Well, before the elections, Mr. Trump promised that he would introduce sanctions or tariffs also towards the European Union. For us in the European Union, just like in the UK, the United States is our most important ally, our most important trading partner. We have absolutely no interest in starting any kind of trade conflict. That's why in the moment we are engaging at all levels, trying to convince the Trump administration that in the end, imposing tariffs on the European Union would trigger a retaliation tariffs from our side, and this would be in the end a total lose-lose situation. Tariffs are not the right way forward. We should be strengthening our transatlantic cooperation, and we should have a close look at why we have such a trade surplus as European Union with the United States. We are ready to offer the Americans some concrete ideas, how we can improve things, but once again, we are in this together, and we should not weaken each other as leading forces of the Western world.
But if they go to, as it were, trade war with you, you're going to fight fire with fire.
We have informed the US side that, of course, we have retaliatory measures at our hand. But once again, we are not interested at all in starting this. We want to make concrete offers to the US side. I think that, for instance, when it comes to defense spending, we know that some of the additional defense spending in Europe, including in my own country, this will go into American products. We have offered that we would be ready to also import further energy from the United States. Let's have a close look. But once again, please, no tariffs. This is the wrong way forward.
David McAllister, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Durman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
They call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Sir Ed Davey, Sky News.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Back to our panel, Camilla Cavendish, Greg Dyke and Steve Baker. Greg, David McAllister seemed to be holding open the door, which our government seems to want to keep closed.
I think we've reached the... I think during this Parliament we'll reach the stage where some politicians have got to say, we want to go back in, straightforward, we want another referendum about going back in, we've got to get... Now, I can see why the Europeans would be nervous of this, because we might then have another go, someone else might try and run the campaign to take us out again. So maybe you've got to go back in with 55% or something like that. But somehow we have got to say we want to go back in. Now, what the European Union will be by the time that comes will be, I suspect, different. But personally, I think, the Labour Party was so nervous of saying anything in the last election, and you understood why. But I don't think we can carry on like that. We've got to actually say we want to go back into the European Union.
Steve, this is an interesting point, isn't it? That the thing that we might be discussing, getting closer to, joining, whatever you want to call it, will be different to the thing that we left.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the arguments that I and others articulated was that we knew where the train was going and it was time to get off if we didn't want to go there. And, of course, events have developed. You listed the populist parties who have been arising. I do agree with Greg that it will be different. But if I may just sort of slightly step back, we talked about immigration earlier and so forth. So the social democratic nations are running out of young workers to sustain the older population. They're also running out of money to just meet their bills. And that is crystallising everywhere in the rise of these populists. And it's a really serious problem. Basically, the social democratic model post-war is now in collapse because it's running out of younger people and it can't meet its pension obligations. That is going to change politics everywhere. And how we react to it is going to define the world for all of us for the rest of our lives. Now, one has to look at, would being in the EU solve the problem of growth? Well, I've got the GDP figures here. The main thing you learn from being in the European Union when you look at GDP is it doesn't make much difference to the UK either way, being in the European Union. But what you can see is it leads to stagnation for all of the European nations. So we are going to need to do things.
You mean the demographics leads to stagnation?
No, I mean, just when you look at the GDP figures for Europe, it's a long history of stagnation compared to, say, the United States, just to pick one example. And we are going to need to regulate differently to go for growth. And that is the fundamental problem with the European Union, is for all of them. They are the embodiment of the social democratic model, which is now failing. And we're just going to have to deal with that.
Camilla, do you accept that as a sort of... you supported what some people might... a Conservative administration that behaved like a social democratic administration.
I'd like to be able to agree with Steve on at least something. So let me try and do that. Look, I think we just have to be really pragmatic. And we just need to stop being ideological about all of this, on both sides. The world is changing very fast. As you say, Europe has been stagnating, or parts of Europe have been stagnating for a long time. It's interesting to see David McAllister talking about defence and security from a country, Germany, which has not paid its way in NATO, which has been buying Russian gas for years, and which has now said it's going to start buying Russian gas again. I mean, there are a lot of things going on beneath the surface here. But if we can set aside all of this history and say to ourselves right now, what is going to serve our national interest best? That means, over half of our exports still go to the EU. So that means some form of relationship with the EU. But I totally agree with Steve on regulation. And I don't see, unfortunately, any real deregulatory package coming from the current government, even though it's talking the talk. It's very, very hard to unwind many of these things. But if we really want to unleash the entrepreneurial spirit that we know we have in this country, we need to make a lot of changes.
Well, this is a frustration I have, because we do agree on that. And I would love to set history aside and get on and differently regulate the country to go for growth. Okay. And we can agree on that. But if we were back in the EU, the powers would go back to the European Union. We'd have to get member state agreement across the whole EU.
We were brilliant at gold plating. Remember, we gold plated every EU regulation.
Can I bring us back to can I bring us back to vulgar party politics? One of my colleagues says that, as we showed earlier on, Reform has now overtaken the Tories and has built on its electoral performance back in July. This is not going to go away. The local elections in a few months' time. One of my colleagues suggests that what Reform is doing to the Tories, Steve, is what the DUP did to the Ulster Unionist Party in Northern Ireland, which is essentially to supplant it.
Well, it's a fascinating comparison, which forced me to think about it. On the first hand, well, yes, because they have hollowed out our core vote, which certainly the DUP did to the UUP, but also no, because what Nigel Farage is doing is attracting voters from the Labour Party, and he's also attracting votes from people who don't usually vote. I've heard him say it. Whereas the DUP did not attract Irish nationalist voters. So that wasn't a factor with the DUP. And the other thing is that there was a massive change to the way the First Minister and Deputy First Minister were chosen under the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. In a nutshell, there's power sharing. Unionists and nationalists are forced to share power. And the way you chose the First Minister and Deputy First Minister went from the largest designation to the largest party, and that meant unionist voters flocked into the DUP, and that's really what finished off the UUP. So it's a sort of yes and no.
Greg, the big thing is that Reform is doing pretty much what these right-wing parties are doing across Europe. They may not be in power, but they are making everybody else change their position.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? You look at Reform. I mean, Reform should have more MPs than it's got, according to its vote. I mean, if we had a proper proportion...
4 million votes, five...
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And actually, but if you look at that chart you just had up then, the proportional representation would mean that actually they're still only getting, even when they're doing 24.6%, and everyone else will be against them, I think. Everyone is going to look at certain issues. There are certain issues in which immigration, I suspect, is the top one, but housing and growth are the others. I personally think they will supplant the Tory party. You want my honest opinion?
Camilla?
I think it's been really interesting since the election how worried this number 10 has been about reform and how much, as you said, how much pressure the fact that the worry of reform taking Labour votes is actually making this government think about a range of issues that reform care about. I mean, primarily immigration. Whether they can sustain it, we don't know. I mean, I think the real issue here is that a lot of people, as I said earlier, are not listening to either of the two main parties at all.
All right. That is it for this week's show. I'll be back next Sunday, 08:30.